Hello, welcome to another live. We are inside the Radiantly Alive Woman Facebook community. This is a Facebook community of only women, and we are here to learn all about the wisdom of our body through things like different body practices. And right now we are deeply focused on the importance of scars. So one of the body practices that I teach is scar work, which is a very large, all-encompassing kind of progressional program that involves directly touching the scars as well as indirect methods. For example, breath work is one of them. Another example is specific, really precise level movement to start moving the scars, not only the scar tissue local, but all of the neighboring organs, systems, and then what that does for our body as a whole. Scar work is one of the most transformational and potent tools that you can have to resolve long-standing issues. A lot of women are dealing with stuff that we don't have answers to. Maybe you've been dealing with digestive issues for a while, chronic pain, mental health disorders. Maybe you've been going through joint irritation. There's all sorts of stuff that can be going on. Poor quality sleep, really feeling emotionally sensitive, very, here and there with our emotions. All of these things that maybe you feel like this is just how you are now because of X, whatever has happened. Maybe you had a surgery, maybe you've given birth, maybe you feel like you just run yourself dry because of the profession you're in. And we assume that this is just how we're going to be now. And I want to offer all of these different vantage points. And most importantly, the whole goal of this Facebook community and of these teachings is to help women understand that there are answers and that we are not stuck the way that we are. And there are other ways to look at our body and our mind, and how to, most importantly, take the reins of our own health, take control of how we feel by doing things that are very confident building, empowering, and I'm here to kind of show you the way. I do these videos twice a week live, and I also help women in different programs. We have a one-to-one program right now, and very soon I'm going to announce a very exciting announcement that I will share shortly. But for now, we are in our second live. We're going to talk about hernia repairs, hernia scars. This is a really deep topic, and we'll probably end up doing a few different videos on hernias because there's about 7 or 8 different styles of hernias that you can have. And a lot of them have very different qualities. So if you watch the video that we did yesterday around a breast reduction scar, the kind of energetic, emotional quality of a breast reduction could probably is very different. In my experience working with dozens and dozens of women with breast reduction scars, their kind of general feeling, their mood around their surgery is very different to a breast augmentation, and then again, very different to a breast reconstruction. So when we're thinking and taking into consideration our scars, we want to know about that. We want to be aware of that what's happened to our body, each single event, accidents and surgeries in particular, where we have wounds that healed and made scars. We want to be aware that each of those have a different kind of energetic quality or energetic signature that we need to address. And scar work is so powerful and potent that it gives you the opportunity to not only work the physicality of the scar, work the physical, but also the emotional and the energetic. Okay? So let's dive right into this hernia scar topic. What we're going to do today is lower abdomen hernias. There's some that you can have up high. There's some like hiatal hernias or epigastric hernias that are kind of above the belly button. And then there's a variety of ones that can go low. So let me just list off the ones that are low, so maybe they're relevant to you. And I know that women have asked about this. We can have inguinal hernias. We can have hernias, I've treated this a few times actually, from the growth of our belly getting so big. Maybe we had twins, or maybe we had a C-section and the belly has a hard time accommodating the growing baby inside of us, and we can have hernias that happen like really low by our pubic bone. This is a pretty common thing. We could also have what people call a sports hernia, which isn't technically a hernia in the traditional sense, but we're going to address it here because it has a similar kind of makeup, although we don't actually tear through the abdominal wall with quite the same intensity as the other kind of traditional hernia. So a hernia is obviously like busting through all the layers of your abdominal wall, and it's made a hole of some size, varying degrees, through all those layers into your kind of internal organ area. So sometimes your small intestine or part of your guts will kind of push out through that hole. Sometimes it doesn't, but you will have a very palpable sense of like being able to put your fingers, however many fingers, through a space that was not there previously. And so they could be centimeters, they could be inches. Sports hernia is like a very intense tear of the musculature, but not a full rupture of all the layers. So that's why I'm just joining it in here, because it has a similar kind of feel, quality. So I think that those are the ones that I'm going to include. I'm just going to look at my notes here. There's also a femoral hernia. So a femoral hernia is your thigh bone is your femur. So any type of inguinal kind of femoral hernia in this area, depending on how it actually protrudes through the layers, it's either called an inguinal or hernia or a femoral. And then we also have an incision hernia. This is really important, and we're going to talk about this a lot. A lot of the time when you have an incision, you have a scar, the body is no longer accommodating there because of the scar, that you can bust through your abdominal area somewhere and create a hernia because of scar tissue that you already had, because of a previous injury. I think that's it. That's all I want to talk about. Think about all those things. We can also have an umbilical hernia. Hopefully this, if you're listening to this will also remain relevant. It's slightly different because it's slightly different, but it will have the same kind of quality. Okay, so let's get into this. Let's understand the physical, then the emotional and the energetic, and then the third part is going to be what to do. What's a preliminary step? This is probably the most exciting part, so stick around to the end of the video so you understand like how can I actually begin working with my hernia scar. It doesn't matter if your hernia scar is new, like a month old, or if it's decades and decades and decades old. You can approach your scar in the exact same way and still receive the same amount of positive benefit. There is some plus to working a scar like right off the hop when it's generally new, but even if your scar, I think I've told many stories already, even if your scar is like 40, 50, 60, 70 decades old, there's still amazing transformational work that you can do with your scar. So don't feel discouraged in any way if you're like, mine's so old, I can't see how this is going to work. I can promise you that it can, and I think a lot of women can back me up on that statement. So when we have when we have a hernia, like I said, it's a protrusion of some sort, a bust through of all the abdominal wall musculature layers. Back in the day, they used to just do a lot of internal stitching. Maybe they would stitch through the different layers. And then more-ish recently, they started using mesh. And now I think that mostly the first go-to is mesh. It depends on the size, the location, who you are, like what stage of life you're in, whether they're going to choose to use mesh or not. But I think the general vibe now is putting mesh in. But before, they used to do a lot of internal stitching. So as an idea, this is really important to know about. Most women know if they have mesh or not. Sometimes women had a hernia, got internal stitching, and then that didn't work. It opened up again and they got mesh the second time. So there's actually 2 surgeries on top of a single hernia incident. We want to be very aware that when we have a scar, it's not just the scar that we see. And hernias in general are a really good example of this. We need to be aware that what we see is a very superficial layer. So the abdominal area, specifically this low abdomen area, which we're talking about right now, the scar tissue, the wound, while it's healing, the scar will start to bury itself deep It's burying itself deep through the body to find a stable anchor point so that it can really like solidify the scar so the wound doesn't reopen again. Because as we know, as wounds reopen again, there's the potential for infection. And like I say, every time, as soon as we have an opening to the external world, the body wants to close that up as quick as possible because it's a all hands on deck kind of situation that the body has to fight off an infection. As we all know, when we feel really sick, we don't have an appetite, we're tired, our muscles ache, all these things are happening, we're hot to try to combat this infection. So the scar will purposely bury itself down to find a solid anchor point to solidify. What is it looking for? Every single time it will find the most solid thing in the body, which is, without a doubt, bone. Bone's pretty reliable. It's always going to be hard and dense. So when we're thinking about a lower abdominal surgery here, it's very likely to be attaching onto these front pelvic bones. Often we call them hip bones, but they're actually the front part of your pelvis. The other thing that they will very likely attach onto is the pubic bone. Very happy to attach onto the pubic bone there, very solid. The other thing I want us to be aware of, and I've mentioned a few times when we're talking about lower abdominal injury or lower abdominal scarring, is if you have slow digestion, like if you have sluggish digestion, you're prone to constipation. This especially ramps up when we're older, like more sedentary. Or you're in a profession where you've kind of trained yourself to hold your pee for extended periods of time. This is a really common thing that teachers say to me all the time, like, I just don't have time to go to the bathroom. And if you've kind of walked into the Zoom world, you may have like meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, and you don't have time to go to the bathroom. Why I'm bringing this up is because the intestines, like our gut, as well as our bladder, so bladder, bowels, those are supposed to be empty, like hollow organs. But for all the reasons, whatever reason it is, oftentimes these organs become solid. So why is that a big problem? Because depending on where you're at in your healing process, the scar could start to bury itself into these organs and kind of slowly start to suffocate them. This is also true if you're like a sedentary person and you decide you want to lose a bunch of weight and you're starting to move in different ways. The body's having to accommodate different vectors because you're going to the gym and the scar tissue is going to be like, whoa, I'm not ready for that. It's going to start to find its way into something more solid, maybe wrapping itself deeper into the now solid organs or going deeper into the bone. It could also happen if you like decide to take up tennis. Sports and hernias are incredibly common. That's why they call them sports hernias, because sports in general are very dynamic. They're multi-dimensional. You're doing tons of different movements that are very different to if you sit in a gym equipment and they're pretty like single plane. You know what I mean? Like you're just going like that and you're going like that. Or you're going like this or you're going like that. Okay, so that's a very different kind of movement pattern to playing ice hockey or playing tennis or just going for a run. There's a lot of like power and oomph, and it's a completely different pattern, which is why hernias are really common with athletes. So we want to think about that with scars in this area, their capacity to bury themselves onto stable anchor points. Pelvic bones, pubic bone, maybe your organs. We're also thinking about the internal scarring as it's going deep, and then thinking about the mesh. If you have mesh in the area, I'm going to give you a what to do that does not involve direct method of touching of the scar. When we did the scar class yesterday around breast reduction scars, I said, yeah, go in and start touching those scars. It's really important. Here, and especially so, like a word of caution, if you have mesh in your body, you want to be very careful. You don't necessarily want to approach doing scar work right off the hop. Because the mesh, like how the mesh kind of seals itself in is by way of like fibrotic tissue kind of solidifying around it. So you definitely don't want to start going in and poking and prodding your body if you have mesh. You need to slowly approach this method and be guided by a professional. So when you hear me do the what to do, it will not be touch your scar and start moving it. It's not to say that you can't do it. And one of the ways that I start guiding people to do scar work is to start actually building a relationship with the area. increasing your palpatory sense, your touch sense, because you will build that over time. Just like myself as a clinician, I touch bodies all the time, so I have a very heightened sense of touch. It's not to say that you can't build that yourself, and I highly suggest that we do, because touch is a really powerful tool that most of us are just leaving completely untapped. So we want to think about, do we have mesh, do we have internal scarring, and all that around the physical. And the main kind of overarching thing I want to talk about in the physical is this lack or challenge that we now have to pressure. This is a huge point. Women who have hernias have pressure problems. Women who have pelvic floor scars have pressure problems. Women who have C-section, hysterectomy, they'll have pressure problems. Meaning, if you imagine, just visualize a party balloon that has a certain amount of, equalness in the substance, like whatever the balloon is made out of, and it has equal distribution. It's able to handle the pressure that's in the balloon. Now imagine if you were to just deflate a balloon and kind of push on it a little bit and stretch out a small segment of the balloon and then try to blow it up again. It would have a little bulge. It wouldn't be busted. It wouldn't be letting air out, and the balloon would never inflate, but it will have a challenge to the pressure. So you'll have a weak link in your pressure system, which is your internal kind of torso area. So let me just build this out a little bit more clearly, because it's super important. We have a diaphragm here. I spoke about it yesterday. That's very domed. So you can think about your body as being its own party balloon. It's not totally accurate, but it's a good visualization to just start. So we have this diaphragm that's the top of our balloon. We have an abdominal wall. That's the sides, abdominal wall, sides of the body, and then back of the body. That's the sides of the balloon. And then the bottom of the balloon is our pelvic floor. This is a closed system, ideally. This is a closed container that is functioning just like our lungs. How they inflate and deflate is by way of pressure gradients. This is also really important, that it is maintaining a certain quality and type of pressure. Not only is it good for breathing, but it's also incredibly important for the stability of your spine, to feel solid and aligned and safe. That feeling of vulnerability, when your back's not quite right and it feels kind of you could tweak it anytime. That pressure system needs to be maintained so you don't have those feelings. It's also incredibly just normal and nourishing. It's what your organs need, is that proper pressure. Because everything, the kind of issue that's going on with Western modern medicine is we think about an organ as if we take it out and put it on the table. And then we start talking about the stomach it's its own thing. But really the stomach could so deeply involved and integrated into all of the digestive organs that we shouldn't really be talking about it in isolation. And that's how I want you to think about all of these digestive organs. They're functioning together. They're functioning as a unit that is relying on this proper pressure system. And when you have a hernia, say before the surgery, that you're having a massive pressure issue, then you have your wound healed up, you have the scar tissue that's built, and then you have a series of layers of tissue that is now very dense and fibrotic. So before you had a weak link in the chain, maybe it was open completely, the balloon couldn't even inflate. That's a big problem. That's incredibly painful. People feel really unstable in their back and so on and so forth. Or you didn't feel that, but you got the mesh or you got the internal stitching or whatever happened, and now you have scar tissue that's incredibly not responsive to what's going on. The whole point of scar tissue, of scars building up, is that it anchors and solidifies so that that wound doesn't open up. And the scar tissue will be going in all of these different directions. I like to explain scar tissue lots of wads of little gum going in, however it needs to, or Spider-Man's web. It's a very chaotic kind of arrangement that actually we use to our benefit when we're talking about doing direct method of scar work. But we need to take that into account, because now we have something in the balloon. It's like that's kind of like hard and sealed. And so now when we blow up the balloon, maybe this part doesn't really move, and the balloon kind of moves and increases in size around it. This is why we have incisional hernias. This is very likely why you had a C-section, and then you were growing another baby and you had pubic bone hernias. This is why, because you haven't worked or treated, or nobody told you how to do the scar work on here to allow your body to be more accommodating. So in both directions, you could potentially have a pressure problem when the hernia is exposed and unrepaired, and then when the hernia is repaired, but they're like completely opposite issues. So I hope that makes sense in my explanation. I'm just going to listen to or read Linda's comment here. It looks like a goodie. So Linda says, "Oh my God, I describe intra-abdominal pressure in the exact same way. I feel like I'm listening to myself. I've never heard it from someone else. So useful and clear." You're so welcome. Yes, I'm glad that all resonates and feels like it makes sense. It's like really important to me that I speak with clear language. So it's good to know that someone else is feeling like I'm clear. Okay, so that's like the main thing that I want you to think about with the physical. Okay, I'm just like looking at my stuff. I want you to think about this massive pressure problem that may be there. I also want you to think about the breathing issue that's going on. We breathe with a pressure gradient. And so if we do not have that pressure arranged correctly, we have an issue. So if you think about the variety of different types of hernias, you may be experiencing like something going on with your breath, maybe an inability to fill completely, like you have trouble filling your rib cage or your lungs fully, meaning like your inhale doesn't feel quite right. You may feel like you get to a certain point and you go, huh, like there's like a muscle guarding thing, and you're like, I can't breathe that deep anymore because of this, because of my hernia. That's really common as well, because you cannot accommodate. You're not as resilient or adaptable anymore yet until you do the scar work. It's so important that you just recognize that I'm painting this picture of how you're feeling, but there's also a really positive way to move forward. You're not stuck like this. It's just important that you get the whole visualization. And then you're thinking about, lastly, just the health of your organs. Everything needs it. Every organ needs that pressure to accurately and appropriately function. And when one organ is off, the other ones are kind of like, ugh, I got to pick up the slack now. I got to do this thing. So it can be really challenging on all your organs. And I want you to think about the bearing effect that scar tissue in this area has on the organs, but also like the rigidity that can be built in. It's a kind of a safety effect that your body's doing, but we need to take into account to lessen that, to make that not so severe. Okay, so that's the physical part. If you guys have any questions, please just write them out. Then let's talk about the energetic component. Because we're talking about like 4 or 5 different hernias here, the energetic quality of what's going on for your hernia could be completely different. Like I said, a sports hernia where you have like over-rotated, over-twisted, maybe had a compensation pattern that led to the sports hernia, will have a completely different vibe to a hernia that has occurred because you're carrying twins. So they're just not even in the same camp. So what I say all the time for the energetic, important considerations of scar work is you need to think about 3 different phases of the incident. Here it's a surgery, so it's easy to talk about. The before you had the surgery, what was going on, the during the surgery, and then the after. So before the surgery, when the actual hernia occurred, like what was going on? What did you feel? Did you feel fear? Were you afraid that you were never going to be able to play sports the way that you like are right now, and that made you really fearful and really freaked out, afraid? That could be happening. There could be all of these different energetic kind of things that go on. Mostly as a general whole, when you feel like you got a literal hole in your body, there's worry, there's fear, there's panic. And there could be a downhill slide of your health after that. Maybe your bowels aren't functioning as normally. Maybe your bladder's off. So there's a lot of things, like a lot of worry, and depending on the person, a lot of anxious kind of like ruminating, kind of spinning thoughts could be going on. So you want to know what that's like for you. Be super clear on that and honest. I always say having honest, genuine, real conversations with yourself about this is so potent, because the healing potential and transformation becomes like that much more accelerated, because you already know where you're at. You're already like very real and honest. Then the during. The during for these examples are pretty obvious. The fact of going into surgery is scary. There's a lot of just worry and fear about that. How did that play into? Was there complications? Was there, relationship dynamics during the surgery, like maybe with your spouse or family or whatever, that freaked you out? Whatever it is, it needs to be thought about as well. It's really important. A lot of people, I hear this a lot from women, they feel like they were mismanaged, or sometimes they'll use the word manhandled by medical staff. Even if the medical staff had the nicest, most genuine intention to help and make sure that you're okay. A lot of the times when you're in that raw state of vulnerability, it doesn't feel like that to you, and that's okay. But we also want to know what that's like. And then the after is potentially the area where you remember most. Usually the healing of a hernia scar is kind of a big deal. It's kind of slow, there's all these restrictions, and there's a lot of worry around, will this thing open back up again? Especially if it was your second surgery. If you had an internal scarring surgery that busted or popped again, then you had to get mesh. There's a ton of like fear of repeat. So again, know what that's like for you. This is probably, I'm usually really clear with the energetic qualities of the surgeries, but because there's just such a mixed bag in here, if you have any questions about the energetic considerations for your scar, if you have, a femoral hernia, if you have a sports hernia, if you got an incisional hernia, if you got inguinal, just let me know and I'm very happy to direct you. Then we want to just lastly go into the fun part. Like, what do I do about this? How do I start working this? And I say the exact same thing as the preliminary step, and then I'll give you a second one. This preliminary step is so important. I feel like I harp on it every time, but it's incredibly powerful and it cannot be skipped over, because right now women all over the place don't really realize the potential and power of working their scars. They don't recognize that there is energetic holding. There's emotional stuff all kind of wrapped up in the physicality of the scar. And so when you start working the scar in a physical sense, I would say 100% of the time, emotions and energy and stuff that's all bound and wound up in there will start coming out as well. So we need to approach scar work in a way that's very respectful, in a way that's honoring of yourself and your life history and like where you're at today. All of this needs to be done in a very soft, gentle way, because there has been times when women skip over this step and they go right into the what we assume is the good stuff, the working part, and they get really shocked by how emotional, how much stuff can come out of a scar. So I don't want that to happen to anyone. It's okay, but it's just not the nicest way. I'd rather you progressionally follow the way, so you know what's coming and you feel really in touch with yourself. So let's talk about this first thing. You're going to do 3 things. It's the same 3 things for every single scar. If you got multiple scars, which a lot of us do, you need to know it for every single scar, because every single scar has a different story. What you're going to do is you're going to sit or lay in a comfortable position with your eyes closed, and you're going to make contact with the scar wherever it is on your body. You're going to make contact with the scar, activating the sense of touch. The sense of touch is the only sense in our body that's bidirectional, meaning your hand is receiving benefit, feeling, receptor. It has a healing quality, as well as the area that you are touching. It is also having that same benefit. It has a sense of receptivity. It has a sense of healing. So it's a bi-directional sense. Nothing else is doing that. It's a very potent thing to start engaging, and you're going to meet your skin, meet your body with just a touch, meaning you're not pressing hard and you're not just barely touching. You're intentionally making contact. Eyes closed, sitting or laying. And then you're going to do 2 different observations, feeling and sensing, becoming aware of the physicality. So the physicality being, is there altered sensation? Is there places that are really sensitive? Do you have an aversion? Do some places make you feel nauseous? Is there a dullness? I don't feel anything. I don't have anything going on. It's numb. What's going on in like that park? Then is there temperature? Is there areas that are really hot, really cold? That's very likely as well. And then you want to pick up all the physical. Is there roping? Is there like puckering? Is there like places of tension? Does it feel like it's a lot deeper? Because it is, but over time you'll start to feel that. But can you feel that off the hop? So the scar that we see is not exclusively the scarring, especially for hernias, as we all know. So pick up all that physical stuff. Get a sense of that. Feel it, touch it, what's going on, how does it feel? And then the final part, the third part, is the emotional, energetic quality. What do you feel emotionally, energetically as you make contact? Think about the before, the during, and the after. A lot of people feel like all kinds of stuff, and they're all correct. They feel sad, they feel grief, they feel resentment, they feel hot and angry. They maybe feel nothing, which is also a really important note. If you feel nothing, that's a really good indication that you are disconnected and out of touch with that, which is okay. There's so many reasons for which we have, pulled away. We, as human beings, we naturally pull away from stuff that hurts. We lean away from stuff that challenges us, and that's the natural thing that's hardwired in our body to keep us safe. But we also want to know that when we touch and meet the area, you're like, Kendra, I got nothing. I got nothing going on. And we want to, again, that's even more reason to walk gently and slowly into this process, because we don't want to catch ourselves off guard. So the whole kind of gamut, I want you to gather that as a baseline, know what it feels like, and then you're going to go into the second part. The second part that I suggest that all people, all women do who have lower abdominal hernias is you're going to do breath work. You're going to breathe directly into the scar. So what am I talking about? We, as a whole, we will not breathe into areas where we have scars. So I was talking about it here with breast reduction surgeries. We're very likely to breathe in our chest or breathe low. If we have a C-section and a breast reduction, we've really limited where we're breathing, and we may breathe in our chest and maybe some side breathing. It's really interesting to see this. You will not be breathing where you have the scar. It's very unlikely. Unless you've done really good rehab and you've been conscious of working it, then that's a whole different story. But on the whole, where you have a scar on your body, you will be just breathing around it. So I want you to make contact with the scar with your hand, so you have a more felt sense of where you're supposed to be breathing into. And then just like a balloon, you can use that visualization, and I want you to feel like you're expanding in all directions, meaning you're not just pushing your tummy out. That's something that we would probably naturally try to do if we're trying this out for the first time. I want you to really feel like you're a balloon, like you're reestablishing proper pressure. That's going to soften and loosen all of these poor lumbar muscles and sacral pelvic muscles from being so tight and rigid. It will give you the opportunity to start moving your obliques and the sides of the body. And that will absolutely start to lessen the tension, emotional tension around any worry or fear, but also the muscular tension of holding on. It's very common that we just hold everything in and just stay there and hope that it doesn't bust open again. So I want you to really feel like it's breathing in all directions, really smooth and slow, deep. So you're making contact. Obviously, inhales are coming down and in, expanding the tissue in all directions as you breathe, aka stomach is coming out, and then your exhale, just a natural incline to pull towards the center. So you should have this thing going on with your breathing in all directions, okay? 3 dimensions, out the sides, out the front and back, and then also like this, okay? Get all those diaphragms moving in synchronicity. It's a very, very potent first step. So if anyone has any questions about that kind of progression, let me know. sports hernia after inguinal hernia. Yeah, so that's another really great example. Thanks for being here, Mary. I'm glad you saw that message. That's a really good example of, I don't know if you came here, if you heard it from the beginning, when we have a scarring, it holds that pressure, that area cannot accommodate the breath anymore. It becomes fibrotic, which is what scars are supposed to do. If you were to open up a medical textbook and look up the definition of scar, it would tell you inert tissue, meaning like dead tissue, tissue that no longer receives a blood supply, tissue that is no longer receiving nourishment, which is, I think we now know that that's completely incorrect since we've started discovering more about connective tissue and fascia. But as a whole, I want you to think about like with that scar, it gets like stuck into the body. Yeah, Mary, if you come and listen to like the full explanation, I think this will make sense. But just as a quick one, the scar will get like stuck and kind of like jammed, like pressed into the body. And it's hard, it's fibrotic. It doesn't really like to move, especially if it's old. And then over time, we're breathing, we're twisting, we're moving, especially if you're doing sport. And that area is not accommodating, it's not moving. It's just staying rigid because the scar has not been worked. And so over time, if something is not working, if something's under moving, if something is like fibrotic, as a general kind of principle in the sports and in the sports world, my professional designation is as an athletic therapist, so I know all about this. If something is not moving well, something has to overmove, something has to accommodate, something has to have a bit more give, because something else isn't. And the body is like a whole unit, so when there's a limitation somewhere, something somewhere else has to pick up the slack, something somewhere else has to be more accommodating. And that's when we can have sports hernias like excessive strain and pulling of oblique musculature, like lower abdominal musculature. So I hope that makes sense. Super common. That does not need to happen over time. If you go back, instead of treating the sports hernia, like maybe you have the inclination to, you go back and you treat the inguinal hernia. You go back to the source, like the quality, that came from that. So you go back a step. And there may be other things in your history where you even go back more, which is what I teach. You want to go after things that are of higher priority. And you want to figure out who is like lessening your ability to be like modifying, adaptive, resilient. We want to be resilient human beings that can kind of take on as much as we can. That is kind of the goal. We want to be accommodating and accepting and adaptable. So I hope that makes sense, Mary. And I don't see any other questions here. So it was really nice to spend all this time with you. I'm glad that was helpful. Next week, we'll do 2 more. I'll announce them shortly because it's already Sunday. Usually I don't do lives on Sunday, but it is nice to have so many of you here. And I will be back and I will see you this week for 2 more lives, 2 more scars. And if you are interested in a scar, please write it down inside this Facebook group and I will get to it. We're getting to them all. If you know another woman who would benefit from this information, from this wisdom, please invite them into this group. You're allowed to invite any women into this, any woman you know who may benefit, and I would love to have them. Everyone's welcome. And you are so welcome. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I'll see you soon.